All right. Today is going to be a live Q&A. For anybody who isn't familiar, I'm Dr. Ed. I'm running for separate school trustee in Calgary wards 1, 2, and the beautiful town of Cochrane. And so today, what I thought I'd do is maybe run through some of the most common questions. There were so many great questions that were asked, and I didn't have enough time to answer all of them live, but I've responded to them by email. And so if you have any questions for me, of course, like feel free. We're live now. We can put them on the chat. But I also have a bunch of really great questions that I want to go through as well. That hopefully cover what you have. And the where these questions come from is if you go to Edward C, so edwardtse.com. Maybe I'll put that on the chat to begin with, so that I don't forget. Tse.com. So if you go here, there's like a live chat. And so for the most part, it answers some common questions about the platform, but sometimes it's not able to answer your questions. And so sometimes we need to step in. You have specific things that are not answered by the Q&A. And so this is an opportunity for you to get those answered today. So I'm going to show you a little bit of like behind the scenes, kind of what we see, and then you'll be able to see like some of the questions that came up. And so I had one question. Maybe I'll start off with this question from JM. So JM wrote, is there any one driving, so about the Alberta K-6 curriculum, is there any one driving reason why you're against it? Because they asked, like, I saw that you talk about future ready skills and AI and all of these other things, and there's other concerns that educators have mentioned about the K-6 curriculum. So is there one driving reason why you're really opposed to it? And I told JM, yeah, absolutely. One of the key things for me has been the lack of parent and teacher voice taken into the curriculum. And the reason for this is because, like, in the end, it's very difficult for our children to be successful if we don't have the input of teachers and parents. Like, they're the ones who work directly with our kids, and so they're going to know, like, they need to be involved with the creation of the curriculum in order for it to be successful. So a lot of the concerns that exist today, yes, like, there are challenges with the curriculum itself, but it was the process by which the curriculum was created, which is the biggest challenge. And so that's the one that I'm trying to address most. And this is why in my platform, the parent voice and parent choice is at the top. It's one of the most important aspects. And so I think that hopefully answers that question. But it was a really good question by JM, and I just got that one today. So yeah. Okay. So I had another one from, oh yes, Russ from Bragg Creek asks, um, I'd like to vote for Edward, but I'm not sure I'm even eligible because he lives near Bragg Creek. Oh, okay, so that is a really good question. So that is about, are you in the region? And a lot of people don't realize that the region covered by the Calgary Catholic School District is quite large. And we're talking about all the way from the Rocky View County area near Cochrane, all the way to Airdrie, and also all the way south as well. And so for a lot of people, they're not sure, like, would I end up voting for you? And one thing he told me was that actually his children attend school in Cochrane. And so that's a good indication that you will be voting for myself and for the others in wards 1, 2, and Cochrane. And so that is a good question, a great question. So I'm glad you asked it. So the message is that if your children go to school in Cochrane, then you're in this district. And so that was a really good one. But the key thing to remember, especially when voting, and sometimes people forget this, is that when you're voting, you have like a right, or you have to choose as a citizen if which ballot you're going to take. And so if you're going to be voting for the separate school, you need to specify that, yes, I want a separate school ballot. And sometimes people forget. They go, oh, just give me the public school one. And then you will not see any of the separate school candidates on the public ballot. It's the same, like everything else is the same. However, the ballot is different that you get for the voting of the trustee, depending if you choose separate or if you choose public. So it's very important to choose separate if you're going to be voting for the separate school trustee. And so that was a great question. I am so glad that you asked it, Russ, from Bragg Creek. And another one from Anita. Let's see. Let's see if it answered it. Okay, so she had a question specifically about the curriculum, and this is pretty common. And so she's like, "Are you in support, or have you opposed it?" And I tried to make it clear on the site, but sometimes like people want extra confirmation just to make sure. And so to clarify, when it comes to like supporting or opposing, I stood with 188 school council chairs at the Alberta School Councils Association annual general meeting, or the ASCA AGM, in May. And it was there that we stood together and we opposed the any trying any new curriculum in this time. And we also had a chance to survey all of the parents in the St. Isidore online school. And yeah, the vast majority wanted like to not pilot it at all. So we didn't just like assume that, oh, okay, we didn't want to follow it. We asked the community of parents, and this is the response that they gave us. And so we followed very closely with what was there. But I also think that simply opposing it, saying like we don't want to try it, that's not going to cut it anymore, right? Because in January 2022, there is a plan that no matter what, this curriculum is moving forward. And so we're going to need not just opposition, we're going to need new ideas. And that's exactly why the platform, like if you see the signs out in Calgary, they're very focused on future ready skills and future ready curriculum. Why is this really important? Because we need new ideas. We need things that should go into a curriculum. If we're in the process of doing a rewrite, we need to look at, well, what are the skills that are going to help our children thrive? And I've spoken about this before, but over half of our Gen Z workers are freelancing on AI platforms like Upwork, like Fiverr, um, even like Uber. And so, what does it mean when your boss is an AI and it's not a person? What do we need to do in order to thrive? And so, a lot of people, yeah, like we talk about, oh, I want our kids to be able to make it, and I think that that's the thing that has really changed in the last couple of years. Work has changed, learning has changed. We talk about hybrid learning now, right? At any point in time, classes may go from all in class to online. How do we make sure that that is supported? And so supporting hybrid learning and hybrid work is not easy, and that's a different type of skill set. And so we're at a point of, wow, like nobody knows anything anymore. We have to come up with new ideas. And so having worked remotely for so many years, and by driving a lot of the new thinking in the online school at St. Isidore has given us new insights as to ways that we can do hybrid, ways that we can do the online uh, teaching, that like these are best practices that can be applied more broadly. And so that's where a lot of the ideas and thoughts come from. And so that's why it's a really good question to dive deep into curriculum and the thoughts around it. I think that response I got from Anita was that, thanks, your reply allowed me to make an informed choice. It's my hope that you will continue to be a trustee. Awesome. Really appreciate that. and happy Thanksgiving. So this was sent before Thanksgiving. And so, I'm really thankful that my response was able to help you make an informed choice. I think that a lot of educators have come and spoken to me and said, yeah, a having somebody who is very familiar with this area is able to answer all of my questions, and they have a plan, they have like a solution for what we can do in these different situations has been very, very helpful. And so I'm very thankful for that. And so I'm glad. So if you missed, we are currently talking about the K to 6 draft curriculum, but let's be honest, it's not just going to be the K to 6 draft curriculum. There may be other curriculum as well that we have to deal with. And so that's another thing for us to consider. Okay. And before that, the question that we had was related to voting areas. That was a really good one. So again, like lots of questions, people just pop them up on the chat. And by the way, if you want to like write something in the chat now, I will see it. Right, it'll appear like in the chat here. So don't worry, like I won't miss it. Okay, so let's keep going. I've got a lot of people asking about parent choice. So Giancarlo said, also congrats on running for trustee. I wish you were running in my school district. If I can help in any way, that's really thankful. Oh, he's like happy to do a video testimonial. Oh, that's really nice. So uh, just supporters, like they're not even in the region. They just want to help out. And so I really, really appreciate that. Because we need we need to support each other, even other candidates that I've spoken with. The more that we can support each other, the better we're going to have, like better our education is for our children, the better the education is going to be for our children overall. So these are all really good things. So I'm so glad that he mentioned that. Okay, let's see. Okay. So Kim R from Valley Ridge said, um, private and public school curriculum related to teaching. Uh, related to teaching literacy is also significantly archaic. There's research over the last 15 years and science that shows new ways of administering literacy. The Alberta school curriculum is so far behind. Okay. Some interesting websites to follow and learn about are Fast Forward and Sopris Voyager. Thank you for thinking towards the reality of now and the future needs of our children. You are so correct on your platform ideas. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Kim. I do really appreciate the feedback, and clearly, like a lot of the educators that I speak to are very passionate about curriculum, and this is why it's so important to have teacher feedback, like teacher input. They have to co-create this curriculum with you. You cannot just go and deliver something. And that's why I said my single biggest disappointment of the draft curriculum was the lack of parent and teacher involvement. A lot of parents and teachers think like, hey, we could have incorporated this. And those are all great ideas that should have been incorporated. And sometimes when we put something out without that consultation, we miss out on a lot of those opportunities to do those best practices. Now, she mentioned two different types. One was Fast Forward and Sopris Voyager. And I want to show you a little bit about how I approach, like, because I'm not an expert in the different types of pedagogies. I think Kim would probably be much more an expert than myself. And so usually I use something like the What Works Clearinghouse. And so they have a really great database, and this is from the US. And what they're trying to do is just look at all of the academic literature related to education. And in it, you can search and you can find four specific practices. So if it's fast forward, yes, here it is. Boom. Right? You can search for it right on the what works clearinghouse site, and you can actually see how many people were tested and how well it did. So let me show you an example. So in this case, I'm looking at fast forward. And so this is the method that she recommended. And you can already see like in something like this, um, the effectiveness rating it's already has, like there's 5 studies that have already been done with 784 students that have showed that this helps with alphabetics, that helps 4 studies that meet the standards for K to 3, showing 702 students have been studied. That says it helps with comprehension and reading fluency. There's 1 study that meets the standard that has 308 students. So these are tried and true practices that we know work in practice. And so that's something that we're really thankful for because it gives us so much information about exactly what works in this time. Now, all right. So many questions. We're going to go on to the next one. I had a colleague say like, "Oh, I love your passion. Um, I need to learn more copywriting tips from you." And so, where does this come from? Just as a little bit of background, copywriting is an area of passion for me. It's a skill that I've been learning. And it's just the skill of like mass communications. Like, how do we write tweets? How do we write effective web pages? That convert. And I think that it's a skill that is useful for everyone. Every student should have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about copywriting because this skill is just so essential. Everybody like when you are online, it's the only difference between you and everyone else is just like how well you write your messaging. Does it have an emotional appeal? Is it something that people would actually like to retweet? Is it something that they would like to expand upon? I don't know. But if it is, then you're going to have much more compelling copy. It's going to be much more successful. And so it's just about learning what the best practices are. All right. So that was a great one. Um, okay. So I had another one. Question from CB. He's in Ward 1. He asked, "What are you a doctor of?" I love this question. It's a great question, CB. So my PhD is in the area of computer science. And there's a couple different aspects to my PhD background. So during that time in computer science, I worked mostly in the human computer and interactions lab, which is kind of like a combination of like psychology and like the computer side, like computer science. And I really enjoyed this because there's that human element to it. But in my actual like thesis work for my PhD, I did have a chance to do some machine learning. And so what we were doing is we were building algorithms to detect gestures on a tabletop display. So we would detect like 2 hands like touching on the side of a display. We detect like gestures like fists on the display or the whole hand or the side of a hand. And we use those in order to send them as input to the computer. And so in doing this, we had to train a bunch of samples. We put a bunch of people's fingers, we asked them to do the different gestures, and then we trained a machine learning AI in order to tell what type of gesture was shown. And that was kind of an early exposure. Um, so this is about my what are you a doctor of? What are you a doctor of? This is the question. So I I thought that that was it was interesting in itself, right? Like the work was really compelling. We actually did this over a game. I think it was Warcraft 3. I wonder if I can just bring it up here just to show you because this is difficult for me to explain. But it's still on YouTube. My video from I don't know, like God, I'm going to date myself, but more than 10 years ago. And Google Earth on a table. Is it, oh, there it is. Yay. Okay. So this is the video of my PhD work.
In this video, we explore interaction with commercial map-based applications on a multi-user tabletop display. Is how can we redefine the interaction so it's suitable for a multi-touch tabletop interactive surface? We've added the ability to do a panning action with one hand, and it's also possible to use a zooming action by spreading two fingers apart or putting two fingers together. Fly to Boston. You can see that the space is moving, but you know why the space is moving in particular. You know that I'm going to Boston, Massachusetts because I said that command verbally. So let me remove this layer and try another layer. Undo layer, layer, dining. Undo layer, layer, buildings, navigation panel. And I can rotate or tilt the space slightly, and I can rotate it around to get a sense of the topography of the different buildings around this area. You can reorient, undo layer, navigation panel, measure distance. So if I want to find out the distance from this block of the city all the way to
I'm going to skip a little bit here.
What I do is I draw the space. Select units using a single finger by touching on them. So I can make them either move or attack by putting two fingers onto the surface. And you can see that this unit is now moving to the new location. I can make them move back as well. Move here. You can see that there's some kind of auditory command. If I say attack here, you can hear that there is some auditory response. I can basically put my hand down and I can select units between a particular region using a bimanual selection technique. This is something that's quite difficult to do with just a mouse. And I can actually take those units and I can label them as particular numbers. So if I say label as unit 2, move here. And you can see that the two units are now relocating. Next worker, you can see I'm relocating to where all the workers are, and I build a farm here. And then he's going to go off and build a farm. Build a barracks here.
So I hope that that makes sense. So it was the use of voice and gestures. And the funny story about this is that I remember when I started my PhD, I was doing research in Cambridge in Massachusetts. And I asked my supervisor, hey, would it be okay if I worked on video games? And she said no. And so I came in on the weekend and I built this Warcraft game. And it ended up being like the topic of my PhD thesis. And it was this recognition that like there's always barriers to like creativity. And, we need to just go with the flow, right? Sometimes we need to not ask for permission. We need to just do it. And so it just showed me how important it was. And there's another part to this story. This is just to be clear, this is work that I did in 2005. And I think it was like a couple years later, 2007, that the iPhone was released. Or was it 2006? Like even the first iPhone. And so this is like pre-mobile devices. And so when I did this work, people were like, oh, it's so fake. There's no way it's real. And they couldn't believe it. And then I had comments later, like 10 years later, people are like, man, I remember when I wrote down, this has got to be so fake. There's no way that this is real. And nowadays, every single one of us has a device that does, voice recognition. It can detect multi-touch gestures. This is the norm in society. So we were certainly early in this space. And to a certain extent, we still don't have a lot of the multimodal, that is, like using speech and gesture at the same time, capabilities in our devices. Like we still don't, we either use Siri or we use the touch. We don't use both at the same time. So that's kind of interesting. I think that we still have a long ways to go, to even catch up to where the research has gone. But the research is always ahead of where we are, and that's part of how we predict the future. Like this is how we. It was science fiction author William Gibson says the future is already here. It's just not uniformly distributed. I mean, research. There's nothing that you see today being released on your phones that hasn't been in the research for decades. It's just now you suddenly see this new feature on your iPhone or something. You're like, wow, this is so cool. How did they do this? And people in the research, it's not surprising to most of the people in the research field. So that was a great question, CB from Ward 1. I really appreciate it. And of course, like if you ever want to know a little bit more about what I like, a little bit about my PhD and my background, like you can also check out my LinkedIn profile. Just search Edward, last name TSE, and then you'll be able to find that as well. So it gives you a little bit of background of where I come from and what what I do. But that was a great question. What are you a doctor of? So, there was one other thing I wanted to mention. So I mentioned already that I did some machine learning for that gesture recognition. But what I didn't mention is that we put this this video onto YouTube. And this was back in like 2005, right? So like YouTube looked very different back then. But it became on it appeared on the front page of YouTube. I think it was like like it was like page 1, right? Like it was just on the bottom of page 1. And that was crazy because this is the first video that I posted to YouTube, and it had gone viral. Well, whatever viral was at the time, which is only maybe like 100,000 views. Nowadays, like people have millions of views very easily. But at that time, it was a lot. It was, in fact, enough to get the attention of the AP News, CNN, Business News, even the gamer magazines. And so I have that here. Do I have it here? So I have some old magazines. Oh yeah, here. So here it is, like the PC Gamer magazine. We even ended up on PC Gamer magazine for this. Yeah, I don't know if you can see that one. That's my work. Those are my hands. So it was kind of cool, actually. Like we ended up on like gamer magazines, and so it got really widespread appeal, and it showed me the power of artificial intelligence when it's used on systems at scale. And what I mean by that is, like, nowadays everything that you see online, be it YouTube or Google or your Facebook feed or you name it, or Twitter, it's all determined by an AI. People don't see it that way. They just see it as just Google. But what is Google? There's not a person in Google giving you results for your searches. There's not a person giving you the results for your Facebook feed or your Twitter feed. This is all determined by AI. And so that's why I often say that it's more important to learn AI than it is to learn programming, simply because AI is the thing that is really changing our society. It's changing, it affects everything that you see. Everything that you see on the internet is directly impacted by artificial intelligence. And so, even for people who are working, like, say you work on for Uber or you work for Fiverr, will you get more work? Like, is it going to recommend jobs for you? Are you going to appear on the top of that list? Who determines that? Not a person. It's an AI. And so, people say that I like, people might be concerned that I'm overemphasizing it, but I don't think I am. I don't think I'm overemphasizing the impact that this is going to have on people's lives. It affects everything. that you do on the internet. And so it's a very important thing to think about. And so that's one of the reasons why it's an area that I'm really passionate, and I'm glad I can like bring in these props as we go. And for those who are joining me on Facebook, on Twitch, hi, say hi. Appreciate you joining. So that's great. All right. Okay, so I've got a question from Jackie from Scenic Acres. So Jackie from Scenic Acres asks, how are you going to handle the provincial government curriculum proposals? And she said, so this is where I explained, like, we already opposed it, but we also need to focus on those future ready skills, like I was referring to. And then I also told her, yeah, there's more information on my platform. And of course, like I've done live streams on each one of the topics. So like some people are wondering, like, why would I choose you as opposed to somebody else? I mean, every single one of the platform items that I mentioned, I have a very unique take on it that none of the other candidates have. And you can see them directly on my site. So you just go to my site, edwardc.com/blog, and every single one of those items, uh, like each one of the different platform items, health and wellness, diversity and inclusion, I've made a hour-long live stream on each one of these topics, parent voice and choice. I've made a entire hour-long live stream, and each one of them I've turned into like three, I think, 15-minute videos, 15-30-minute videos, plus like there's 60-second like preview clips. And so it's a lot. I know it's a lot of content. But the reason I mention is because these are all areas that I'm super passionate about. And I mention them because they're areas that I have deep expertise in. And I bring a lot of new ideas and new concepts. And I've had opportunities to check it with others, like even Mary Martin, the chair of the board, just to see, like, am I on the right track here? And, I've been hearing, like, yes, absolutely. I've also been hearing from educators, like, yes, you are absolutely on the right track. For example, Jackie said, you have our vote. Impressed with your presentation. Well done. So, I think there's a reason why she says that, like as people start to see the depth of the platform, these are not just talking points to garner the vote. It's really to talk about the depth, that there's a lot there, and there's a lot of very specific ideas and things that could potentially help. And so I'm hoping that no matter what happens, this is still a useful resource for anyone who's thinking about education. And so that's one of the reasons why I did it. And so, um, yeah. And of course, like if you want to know like when our next events are, like we're going to do these live streams kind of leading up to the election, you can just sign up at edwardc.com/live. So I'll put that URL as well. Okay, cool. Right. So, next question. Lori from Royal Oak asks, what separate school trustees in Calgary believe in the new Alberta curriculum? What separate school trustees in Calgary believe in the new Alberta curriculum? And I asked, like, so what do you mean? Like, do you mean like the ones, like the current trustees? She's like, no, like the ones up for election in Ward 1. And so, from what I can see, and this is not clear to me as well, most of the candidates, at least on their website, are saying like, "Hey, I'm not in support of the curriculum," but to what degree? Some of them are saying, "Well, we should support them. We should support the existing curriculum," and there are. I have seen some, but not in our ward, where they straight up support it. And I think that the challenge with it, like I said, is support or not is not the most relevant question. It's really like, okay, let's say that it's still running through anyways, regardless of your input, um, which from all indications is likely what's going to happen. What are you going to do about that? What can you do? What are your options? And having different ideas, having different things that you can propose can be one of the ways to work around it, or to make the best of the current situation, which you may or may not be able to control. Whether or not you are for it or against it doesn't matter. What you can do, if it moves one way or the other, like what's the plan? And to that extent, I think this is where there's a lot of this is where I think we can really take in the account of we can really take the learnings from the St. Isidore school when I was the school council chair there, which was we had to do things at scale, right? Like we had 10 times the number of students of a regular K to 9 school. We had 5,700 students. And so with that many students, it was very clear that you couldn't have a one size fits all for things like, hey, we're going to even do an activity together. We had to provide options, right? We had to go, well, we're going to give you like some options. You can choose to do these ones, or you can choose to do these activities. So we had 3 different activities they could do. And I think that will be really the question when it comes to the curriculum is, let's say that it comes down and we don't have a choice. Okay, so what flexibility do we have in terms of how it's being taught, right? Because curriculum is generally about like subject matter, but it's not about the method by which it's taught. And what does that mean in terms of the PATs, like the provincial achievement tests? What kinds of questions should we be expecting from the PATs as a result of that curriculum? And to a certain extent, like how much of that memorization of facts is really, really important. Um, and this is the real like challenge I have is like I get where they're going with a lot of these things, but they don't go far enough, right? Like they say, like, oh, we want you to learn about this system in social studies and this system, and we're like, why do we have to learn those specific ones? They never explain why. They just say like you need to learn these things. But I think that overall, it's good to know about systems of oppression and how that has been used over time for one group to control another group. And I see it more as a general thing as opposed to like, please tell me the dates of like particular events in history. I see it as like, so I would interpret it completely different, and then I would, see how things turned out. But I'm not an educator, and I don't know exactly how people are going to approach it. And so every curriculum takes years and years of development. And so my thinking is that uh, I would expect some leniency on that first year, and I think that that leniency would translate into flexibility for educators. And I think that as a backup plan, no matter what happens, what is like, let's look at the law. What is the within the scope of what schools and teachers need to do, and what is in within the scope of what the province can do? And let's look at the systems as well, right? Like not just this particular curriculum, but how can it be possible that a curriculum can be so like it can dictate so much about what happens in the classroom? Do we want that? Is that good for our kids? And yes, we tend a lot to be really hard on people and then really soft on the systems that allow people like allow these things to happen. And I feel like we need to do the exact opposite. Like we need to be really hard on these systems that allow for this type of curriculum to be written. And we need to be soft on the people because obviously like the people work within a context, an environment. There's constraints that they work within. And I think we're often very like we're the opposite. And I approach things a little bit differently. Like I mentioned, I'm a very systems level thinker. So I hope that answers your question, Lori. It's a great one. So I appreciate that. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so Liz asked a question. So now she's asking about health measures in schools. And so maybe I'll highlight that one next. Okay. So when it comes to health measures in schools, Liz asks, I would like to know your stance on health measures in schools with respect to COVID. Um, and so that is a great question. And it's one of the reasons why I have a whole platform item just on health and wellness, because this is like top of mind for so many families, so many teachers these days, that everybody is affected by this. And more so now, right? Like now there's new restrictions, and now there are new types of um, there's new health like vaccine mandates, for example. So those are going to change. The changes what happens in schools. And so I said to Liz that like my background myself is in science. And so generally, yeah, my view follows the scientific consensus. However, my approach has always been, and one of the reasons why I put parent voice as one of the priorities of my platform is because I feel it's really important that parents have both voice and choice. They need to be able to choose. They need to be able to choose which option is going to work best for their children. If they need to go online, then they go online. If they want to go in class, then that's what they need. They know better than we do. And so I always argued that I will fight for your right to choose, um, because it's not only like it doesn't matter if I agree or not. Um, your choice is important because it's important for our democracy. Otherwise, we don't have a democracy. We don't have rights. And so that's never really the point of these things. I think really when it comes to education, you've always had a choice. And we've seen this happen in Alberta. There's actually a decline in all the different school districts. So public, CBE, and CSSD have seen a decline in the enrollments because some parents have just chosen straight up to go, we are homeschooling those kids in this time. We are not registering in any school. And that is an option that if they're capable of doing, they have that option. They've always had that option. And so protecting people's right to make choices is very important. I say that like every choice has consequences, and this is normal. This is life, right? Like in life, there's always consequences for every choice. But I do think your ability to make that choice, whether or not I agree with it, doesn't matter. Like you have that right, and we need to protect it. And nothing that like I want to be clear. Like there are charter rights, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms rights. There is nothing that the trustees can do that can overturn any of those, right? So those are more important than any decision that like the board can make. They can't infringe on those rights. So there's been a lot of like back and forth on this, and I hope that clarifies. Like I'm a scientist, and that's why when I look at like, oh, you mentioned a new technique, let me search that. Let me look at those studies. Oh, great. There's lots of great evidence on that. Like you're using an awesome technique. Congratulations. That's how I approach things. But I think that other people have done more research than I am. Like I'm not a medical expert, but I do know that your ability to choose is very important. And it shouldn't depend on somebody's opinion whether or not you can choose. You have the right to choose, and I think that's important. So that was a great question. Thank you very much, Liz. All right, so let's keep going. Okay, so Andrea from Cochrane asks, what's your view on masks in schools? Okay, so I guess like this also relates to health measures, so I'm glad you asked that. I would support masks in school based on the scientific consensus that generally it helps to reduce the spread within schools, and it's not for you, like if you don't have it, it's just like it is to protect people. So I see it as like it's beneficial if the person does have COVID, like they're less likely to transmit it. And she said, excellent. I just want to confirm that as the science appears to show that they are recommended to keep kids safe in schools, that you support them when the provincial government isn't following the science. Oh, okay. Yeah, like at the beginning of the pandemic, they were definitely following the science. Lately, not so much. And so I do think that we're starting to see the consequences of that. And, really, I suspect that this may become the case for the trustees. They have to make really hard decisions over the next little while. Like, what do we do about these mandates? And so, how do you protect people while also? I think on like I've heard it this way. Like, so on one side, there's people who want nothing. They want no masks. They want no vaccinations. And then on the other side, there are people who want more. They're saying it's not enough, just to have the masks and the vaccine passports for the educators. We want to have even more. What do we want? Um, we want to be able to vaccinate our kids, and I think that that's one of the real difficult things right now is that one person's choice is limiting another person's choice, if that makes sense. It's like it's limiting people's freedom because as a parent who wants more options for health, you don't have them. They are not approved yet for ages 12 and under. And so you don't have those options. So what can you do if you want to further protect your family? You are restricted. You are restricted by what is currently allowed. And for those people who want less, like they have that option, right? But it's those people who want more who don't have the option. So that's the challenge is the decision, the choice is not the same on both sides. Um, Government, okay. Yes, thanks so much for your time. Yes, I agree. Okay, great. So thank you, Andrea, for your question. It was a great one. I appreciate that. I'm gonna keep going. Man, so many great questions. Okay. Marlis from Royal Oak asks, want to know your stance on the K to 6 draft curriculum. And like I said already, I've mentioned this before, future ready skills, like the opposition. And Marlis says, awesome. I'm an elementary teacher and I oppose it as well. That's all I needed to hear. Oh, that's awesome. So I really appreciate that. A lot of teachers are reaching out to me and saying, like, you're the ideal candidate because we've looked at all the different candidates and you're the one that I'm really happy with. So, okay. Not sure if you can. Do you oppose the curriculum in accordance with the consultants that we heard? I recall the consultants. Okay, so Paula is asking the question of, do you oppose the curriculum with the information that was heard? So what information was heard? So the Calgary Catholic School District, they brought in curriculum experts to evaluate the curriculum, and they gave a very detailed report of all the things that they found really wrong with it. And I can't go into all the details, it would take too long, but really the high level stuff was age appropriateness. So people are learning stuff at really young ages, which didn't make a lot of sense. It wasn't age appropriate to be talking about those things. And it was also a lot of breadth. It covered many different topics, but not in a lot of depth. And if you look at how our world is today, we require people to go in a lot of depth. You have to do like projects. Everything you do at work is very deep. And so having many projects that you cover a little bit means that people never really develop any skills. They never go deep anywhere. They never really develop their own passions because there isn't enough time. We have to move from subject to subject to subject. And that's something that we've also seen in US curriculum as well, is when there's a lot of stuff that you must cover, there's this pressure to always teach. I've got like two or three things I got to cover per day. I don't have time to move to the next one. And so you change the way that you teach. You use a lot more direct instruction. There is consequences to having a lot of breadth in the curriculum, and we could see like that was one of the major challenges. And of course there's concerns about race, about the Eurocentric view in the social studies curriculum. This is only scratching the surface of some of the things that they said. And so these are some of the reasons why like the opposition made a lot of sense. But we didn't have that information when we were at the Alberta School Councils Association. That came later. But it's good to know in any ways, and it's something that we followed very carefully. And so this is Dr. Zoomless's Zoom call, is what she calls it. um, I want to know you will listen to the very loud voices saying no. This is a very important thing, is that in general, and it's one of the reasons why I say that like the parent voice and choice is so important. There's a lot of people who are coming up to me saying like, I feel like I'm not being heard, or I feel like I'm being ignored. And I'm like, oh, why? Right? Like you could reach out to your teacher anytime. You could reach out to the principal anytime. Um, some of it's cultural. Like if you have a high power distance culture, you just don't talk to those people. You don't talk to people of authority, and that can be one of the challenges. But it's also like, how accessible are they? It's actually one of the reasons why I set up this chat system, like edwardc.com. You go, there's a chat dialogue right there, so that the barriers to communicating with somebody like myself is super low. I know a lot of others are like, oh, just send me an email, no problem. But a lot of people hesitate. They don't want to send an email, write the subject, give you your email address. I just want to write something really quick. And, I don't want to give you my name. I want to do it anonymously. And so giving people a place to do that, a place where you're just like, I'm going to listen. And how do you listen? Like, I would love to just like sit down with people, right? Like have an open town hall. It's so hard to do that these days. And so why I've been doing so many live streams? Why so much of these Q&A sessions? It's exactly because listening is how we get the best ideas, right? It is in this listening. And so I've had some people like message and like, hey, what are you doing about this? And I'm like, great, let's have a call. I'd like to like really listen to all of the things. And I'm trying to write down. I'm trying to like repeat what they said. I want to make sure that I fully understood, and I want them to confirm that my understanding of what they said is correct. And that is something that is very important. Like we want to be actively listening, not just listening, but acting. And so when I talk about the parent voice and choice, like as the school council chair for St. Isidore, we always made a point of making sure that we respond to the parent feedback. So we ask parents for feedback. Don't just ask them for feedback and don't do anything about it. Report the next meeting about, here is the parent feedback that we received. Here's the actions that we took from your feedback, so that they know that it makes a difference, right? Like that's the whole point of this parent voice and choice, is like, if it doesn't cause change, what's the point of giving it? And I think maybe some people have become so used to giving suggestions and having them ignored that they just stop. right? Like, think about it. Like, if you were a teacher and you had a student who was asking questions, and every time like they asked their question, you didn't answer them. You didn't do anything, or like, they had all these suggestions for how things could be improved. They're really engaged in school. Well, how engaged is that student going to be now? They're not going to be engaged at all. And so I feel like that defeats the whole purpose. And so I really appreciate you mentioning that. Huh, this is hard. No, Blair's wearing a Hinge t-shirt on our website. Out of touch, no experience or ideas. Ouch. Paula was just talking about some of the other candidates, and you know, I get that. Like, I saw that. Uh, I didn't know about the t-shirt thing until I think Paula and others mentioned it. But yeah, like, it really triggered a lot of people. Surprising. Like, one of the candidates had a Dina Hinshaw t-shirt on, and this was really triggering for them, because like a lot of the situation that they're in right now, they're very frustrated about, like, are because of policies. And again, like, this is like totally blaming the people, right? Like, oh, it was like because of like the politicians and the people in power. But I think really, like, the systems that allow this are also at least partially to blame. And so it's things that we need to consider, right? And but I could see why. I can totally understand why that is very, it's very traumatizing. Like, and this is the thing that people don't, I don't know why, but like, it always seems to be a challenge with respect to getting, like, I want to call this like understanding trauma triggers. I even mention this in my health and wellness section in the blog, that we got to start talking about trauma and triggers. Certain things trigger people. It brings back trauma for them. And so if somebody is like knows people who are like were really sick or really impacted by COVID, and then you go and wear like a Dina Hinshaw t-shirt, that can be a trigger for certain individuals that causes more trauma for them. And the same thing can happen for anything. Like, you could do some act for reconciliation, and it reminds them of what they experienced when they went to school in the residential schools. That can be a trigger. It can cause more trauma. And so understanding trauma is very, very hard. And I do not have the expectation that, people are just going to be able to learn this stuff. It takes years to develop this type of training. Just ask any like clinical psychologist or any chaplain. It takes years. However, that doesn't mean that we can't make decisions that prevent that. All we need to do is just make sure that we have that voice and choice. If it's we're trying to help Indigenous people, make sure Indigenous people are at the decision making table. And if they are, then you can avoid a lot of the potential triggers that would cause additional trauma. In the same way, if you are trying to help let's say the Black community, then you need to have representatives at the table when you're making the decision. And it's in those acts, like having them at the decision making table, that avoids the situations where, oh, we did something and it caused more trauma. And so it's one of the reasons why I wanted to run, is because this is the stuff that they report on in the news. And this is the stuff that becomes the public perception. It may not be reality, right? Like, many of these things are done with the best of intent, but you're not aware, right? Like, you're not aware of like what causes trauma for others until after the fact. And so I felt like we could do something here. We could communicate. We could get more voice and choice. into the decision-making table. These are all good things. And I don't blame anyone. I think we're all doing the best that we can, given the situation. My focus is always on the systems, right? What can we do in the system that would prevent these kinds of things from ever happening in the future? Voice and choice, huge difference. Okay. All right. Let's keep going. Oh my goodness. Karen from Hawkwood asks. Yes. Okay. So Karen was asking from Hawkwood was asking, well, what's her plan in the event that the curriculum does get implemented in 2022? And I'm so glad that you asked that one, because that, I think, is more likely the reality. You can oppose it. It still may appear. I see that as more realistic. And in that case, it's going to be about parent, and it's going to be about two things. So I'm going to call this one the curriculum. Yeah, let's call this like curriculum plan for 2022 curriculum. K-6 plan if 2022 K-6 is implemented. But we don't know, right? But they want to know, like, what is your plan? And I think that this is another topic that is very important to discuss, because it is a likely scenario, right? It's not a zero probability. So in that case, what I said is that it's about looking at flexibility. And so I talked about my experience as school council chair. We have to provide some flexibility and seeing what that translates into, like, the actual tests themselves, right? Is it going to be like a straight up memorization of facts? Can you modify the evaluation? What flexibility do teachers have? It's about exploring those possibilities. So obviously we need to work very closely with the teacher community in CSSD, but we also need to work very closely with the province to go, well, what kind of flexibility are we talking about here? What is actually going to appear on these tests? What kinds? Can you give us some example questions of what you might see on the PATs that you're going to be evaluating? I think it's very important for us to understand not just what it is, but how it's going to be evaluated. And I think that that's the challenge, is they say that you need to know this stuff, but how would you evaluate that? Would you just put a bunch of facts as multiple choice questions? Like, what is this going to look like? And so the evaluation of it is going to be very important to understand, like, how much of it, like, is impactful. So again, it's a long-term thing. It's something that we'd all need to work together, and we also have to have really good suggestions for how we can do things differently. I see it as, like, if we can, like, work with a higher level concept and we can get them to focus the same stuff on the higher level concept, then it could be good for everybody. And it'll be less, like, prescriptive of, this is exactly what you need to do. They teach this, then teach this, and then teach this. But if it's insisted that, no, you need to, like, well, what is that level of flexibility? So the plan really depends on understanding the full extent of that flexibility as the starting point. And then from there, working out a plan that works best for educators. And it works best for families as well, for parents, because they're concerned as well. Okay, so let's see. Joanna from Ranchlands asks. Okay. Oh, this is a good one. She wants to ask about the actions taken to support Indigenous families. She said, like, oh, you said you've done some stuff. So she is, just an answer to back up the statements made and to further the teaching of Indigenous curriculum. Okay. So this is about reconciliation and Indigenous curriculum. So I am so glad that Joanna asked this one, because Joanna from Ranchlands, because this one is a very a very important topic that I think needs to be like we could do a full like hour session, and in fact, I've already done an hour long session. You just go to the blog, you can see there's a full live stream on there about this topic. And so the first was like, okay, you say you've done stuff for the community. What have you actually done? So as the chair of the St. Isidore School Council, we did a fundraiser. We had this wilderness event, and we raised some money. And what we did is we took a portion of those proceeds and we gave them to the Canadian Save the Children. It is a food foundation that had a matching grant to support Indigenous families in need today. And so we took some of those funds and we put it towards this matching grant. And so I think in the end there was $1,000 donated. And in addition, of course, during our school council meeting, we took a moment of silence. We also were I mean, we're doing what we could, to yeah, I think we took 219, second or yeah, 219 seconds of silence for the 219 children who were we took a second of silence for every child that was found, in those residential schools at the time, and this was before we had the other residential, schools that were discovered, and so it was this realization that just awareness, and I've been saying this for some time, like awareness of these issues of like residential schools isn't enough to help people today. We have to turn those words into action, and the action has to benefit people today. And so, if we understand, like, how can you even help people today who are still going through this? Well, it boils down to understanding that there's trauma there, right? And at the core of reconciliation, and this is something that I learned from the Parenting Decolonized conference, is that at the core of reconciliation is trauma. People are dealing with trauma, and of course, like people heal over time, but there are certain things that we do that prevents this healing, right? It's kind of like you have a wound, it heals up eventually, but then if you keep picking at it, you're preventing the healing, and then it just never gets healed. And so that's kind of what's happening, and we need to understand what are those things, what are those triggers for that community, and that's again where the Indigenous voice and choice comes in. And so when it comes to any curriculum, like it doesn't seem appropriate for us to decide what should be in the Indigenous curriculum. It should be them. What would you like us to know the most? I know there's a lot of stuff in the Truth and Reconciliation report. There's hundreds of pages, and I've gone through as many of those as I could, and I've learned so much in it. Which parts of those are most important to you, right? What would you like us to remember? And more than that, how would you like us to speak? What can we do to help today? Understanding even some of the basics of how we speak to people who have gone through trauma. Don't ask them like, "How you doing?" Just say, "I'm fine. I'm okay." Yeah, ask them, "How are you holding up?" Let people know that you're available to talk if you need. Can I get you something? Right. So it's our own frame and it's our own perspective. There's a lot there's a lot there, and so I hope that that answers it, Joanna. That was a really good question. So, okay, Adam from the Northwest. Uh, okay, he's asking about health. Yes. Okay, he was asking about health. And so this is again like the benefits. Like should they get vaccinated? Should we not get them vaccinated? And again, it was just like following science, but also protecting parent voice and choice, which is very important. So next, Yolande asks, I like the fact that we need a male perspective on Calgary Catholic, the Board of Trustees. I just have a couple of questions. Where do you attend church and are you married? And what are your core Catholic values? Oh, I love this. So Catholic values. Okay, so this is a great question, Yolande, and from Silver Springs. So first part was where do you attend church and are you married? So the first question is yes, I do attend church. St. Peter's is where I attended church, and lately it's been mostly the online churches. But I've been like actively like attending all the different churches lately because we've been as trustee candidates, we're eligible to do some greetings and present some materials at the different parishes. So I've been to all of the different parishes in wards 1, 2, Calgary wards 1, 2, and in Cochrane, and some multiple times. And so I'm glad that you asked. And married, yes, I am married. I have 2 kids. My oldest is in grade 3, and my youngest is just starting kindergarten. So I've had kind of the experience all the way from like really young to like a little bit older, and we've done online a year at St. Isidore. We've also done 2 years at in person as well. So we've had the gamut of experiences. And so that's one of the reasons why I bring a lot of different perspectives from to the position as a potential trustee candidate. Now, what are your core Catholic values? I am so glad. I am so glad you asked that one, because that is something that is um, very important to me. So the way I describe this is like people ask like, why are you in the Catholic system? Like say you grew up in the public system. Like I know I grew up in CBE schools, and so I'm very familiar with what happens in CBE schools. It's like why the Catholic systems? Well, part of the reason was I worked for smart technologies for about 10 years, and during that time I got to visit a bunch of schools. So I visited CBE schools, I visited Catholic schools, CSSD schools, and I just saw like, wow, like they give their teachers a lot of autonomy. They trust their teachers a lot in Calgary Catholic, and I know that that's a good thing. There's a lot of research showing that more teacher autonomy tends to lead towards better outcomes. And so I love the independence that was provided for teachers, and I thought that that would be good. But then it was over the last few years where I just started seeing this divergence between people of faith and people of science. And this really, like, it really bothered me. Like, I don't know why. Like, people were saying, like, oh, increasingly, and I think this is probably due to social media. Increasingly, if people of faith like tended to believe like false narratives about science. So they didn't believe that any of the science was true, and they would be sending out like, oh, like these things are don't get vaccinated, like or like don't wear a mask, like and I saw this like rift between like the two, but to me like this seemed like it really broke my heart because I have always like since I did my PhD, I always felt that like faith and science were trying to pursue the same thing, which is the truth. In the faith domain, we got closer to the truth by not just taking a single sentence and saying that is truth, like literally like interpreting it. No, we had to go back to the context of the biblical text. Like when did this happen? What was society like in this time to truly understand what they were saying? We can't even understand it if we have to translate it. What does the translation mean? What is the context in which it lived? We had to go deep in order to get that understanding. And then in science, it's the same way. In science, you can never prove anything's true. You can only prove things are false. So we have to depend not just on one study, like some one scientist, goes and says something, and we believe that to be the truth. We see one study, and we're like, oh, look, it's all proven. No, it's not. No, it's not. That's not how science works. Science is about many repeated studies and getting closer to the truth by saying, like, wow, we tried really hard to disprove this and we couldn't. Probably true then. Like, that's why we depend so much on meta studies, right? We look at studies of studies to go, yeah, a lot of people have been able to take the same study and repeat the results. Probably it's a good chance that it's true. And so I've always seen them as the same. And so for me, upon studying and researching a little bit more about my Catholic faith, that I learned that actually the Catholic Church is very much in alignment with science. They're not like anti-science. And to me, that was a really important factor because I could not have I could not have like the two values like fighting each other. It just didn't work for me as a scientist. And so it meant that I'd have to change. I would have to change the faith that I was attending. Because I cannot be anti-science and still say that I'm a scientist, right? So um yeah. And so I chose to join the Catholic Church, to go through RCIA, and I know it's like a big process. It's like a more than it's like a year, and you're meeting like 2 3 times in a week, and there's a lot of stuff, but we learned so much. It was a really enriching program, and I'm always blown away. Like I feel like, to a certain extent God called me to do this because during the Rite of Christian Initiation for Adults, RCIA, we were asked to pick a saint who was going to be your patron saint. And so, and this was years ago, like way before we ever had like online school, the pandemic, all of that stuff. Like this is years before that. Um, and I chose Saint Isidore because he's the patron saint of the internet. He is very connected to science, which was very important to me. It's one of the reasons why I chose the Catholic faith. It is the it is something that really resonated with me, and I was blown away when only several years later that there would be a school called the Saint Isidore Online School, and that I would also be the first school council chair or the founding school council chair for that school. Never in a million years would I have predicted that that would have happened in such a short period of time. And so I want to say that I followed the calling to join the Catholic Church. I followed the calling to become the school council chair, founding school council chair at Blessed Marie Rose. And I followed the calling to also be the school council chair, the founding school council chair for St. Isidore. And today, I am following the calling to be your trustee for the separate school district, separate school board. Because I feel that I've got something to offer, but I also feel like I'm being pushed in this direction. I feel like God is really calling me to this position. Now, ultimately, we will see what the result is, but there were 7 other school council chairs that were just as qualified, if not more qualified, than I was for being the first school council chair for St. Isidore. I thought it was like very unlikely that I would have ever had that opportunity. But I won. And I won by a large margin. I think I had like 49% of the vote. And there's 7, keep in mind. And so it was a strong indication that what I had to offer was what people were looking for. They wanted the expertise in, technology. They really cared about the way that I would approach my communications, which was mostly through video. There was a lot of things that they really appreciated. Like it was like exactly what we were looking for. But that was just my experience. Like I didn't decide these things. I didn't like this is just what I do. I work in education, I work in technology. And so it was from that that people said like, yes, we really appreciate like what you do and coming out at the top there. I never in a million years would have guessed that. And so I want to say that my faith has always been core. I've told my children that probably the most important class that you're going to take in school is going to be your religion class because our world is going to completely change. Not going to resemble anything of what you see today. You're just starting to see the beginning of like how things are going to change. And in this world, like of this constantly shifting world of tech and science, what determines like what foundation are you going to lean on? Are you going to go to the latest influencer who, like who are they following? Probably other influencers, right? Like they're not your moral foundation. If you follow them, you're not likely to get their results, right? Like you have to follow your own path, but if you can start with a foundation of the values that are taught in Catholic education, you can be moving in the right direction. Now, I know that there's some concerns, even about the Catholic faith, and I know that some candidates are running on the platform of authentic Catholicism. That we could be more into our faith than we currently are, and I do think to a certain extent, like yeah, that's like sure, there's always more. There's always more that can be pursued. There's always improvement. Um, but I think that it is this foundation of faith and the ability to see injustice in our world and to have that like inner courage to do something about it, to stand up for what you know is right, that I'm hoping that we're going to depend on the Catholic community for. There's a whole new generation of peaceful activists who are leading the change and may lead the change moving forward. And so I want our children to be a part of that. I want them to lead change for the better because there is not only challenges in the existing systems that you're aware of, there is a whole different set of challenges that is developing due to things like social media. It has all of the same biases of our society baked into the machine learning data that it is being trained on. And so if we do not make changes and if we do not push for change, things will become very difficult. It'll become very difficult for minorities. It'll become very difficult for people who don't understand AI. There's going to be a bunch of challenges. Like it may make poor judgments about people. So if we really want to take back control, we have to understand and we have to have a clear understanding when something is not right. Like there is injustice that needs to be fixed. And so where do you get that? Where is that taught? We need to teach it. And so, man, this is really good. Okay, I there's so many questions. I do not have time to go through all of them. I am so sorry. But maybe I'll do one more and then we will wrap it up. All right. Okay. This one didn't give a health and wellness. Yes. Okay. Health and wellness. Okay. Oh, there was another one about like what do you mean by defending Catholic education? And this was an interesting comment. I created a video which was like how CBE and Calgary Catholic work together as portrayed in the media. And like sometimes it looks like there's a conflict, but this is just the nature of how media works, right? Like in media training, when I had that working with the Gauntlet at the U of C, they would explain that your job is always to find the conflict. And of course, as a media journalist, like your job is to get the opinions on both sides. And so go and ask the Calgary Catholics, go and ask the CBE, find out what they're doing, report on the facts of what is happening on one side versus the other. That doesn't mean that they're not working together. That doesn't mean that like they don't consult with each other. They absolutely do. But it is this accountability, this knowledge that it's going to appear in the media. That is something that adds transparency. It keeps everyone accountable. Like whatever decisions you make is going to end up on the news. It's very important. And so I look at it as, maybe there's some opportunities to think about the messaging of how we talk about Catholic education. And so if we talk about it as, look, in the end, everyone is affected by health policies in schools. Those are decisions made by your trustees. And so if you can get your trustees to like make a particular type of health decisions, most of them, like because they work so closely together, it benefits everyone in Calgary, if that makes sense. So just because a decision is made in Calgary Catholic doesn't mean that it will only benefit the Calgary Catholic students. Because they work together so closely, it's very likely that CBE may follow the same protocol, or in the same way, if CBE has some new health measure or something that they're doing, it doesn't mean that it only benefits CBE students, right? It's also very likely that Calgary Catholic would also implement the same. They work together so closely that you see the benefit right away. And so it's a good thing. And this is also something that translates into like other aspects as well. So, for example, there I talked about the St. Isidore online school. Calgary Catholic decided we are going to run a independent online school, and it's just going to be a dedicated school. It's going to be its own school like unit, and that was a really good decision because the following year CBE did the same. They decided, CBE Learn, we're going to turn that into a dedicated school. We're going to have a school council for it. That plan seemed to work out really well, and we were doing this hybrid thing before, and it didn't work out as well. And so it's a good one. And so it's that ability to do a bunch of experiments, right? And it's the ability to recognize that we're in a time where everything's changing about education, and it's very hard for us to say like, oh, we all know better. We know the best way of running education today or hybrid learning in the midst of a pandemic. I don't think anybody can really say that. And so what we need is a lot of smaller experiments. And the challenge as you become a larger and larger organizations is the experiments become more and more expensive, and they become larger and larger scale. And so it's that type of like, Eric Ries calls it the lean startup. Peter Thiel calls it the 0 to 1. And I know people don't like. Somebody was commenting, I really hate how you're using like business ideology. And like, this is just a way of implementing ideas. It's a way of implementing ideas on the cheap. I mean, you could ignore the business best practices and spend lots of money on the experiments that you want to run, or you can do them efficiently, like the way startups run them. But I was criticized for talking about like business related experiments, which I thought was interesting because we need lots of experiments, and we need to find out cost efficient ways of doing them. And if every experiment that we do is going to be this like multi-million-dollar project, and it's going to take several months, we're not going to be able to adapt fast enough to what's changing right now, and it's basically about finding best practices that we can scale quickly. Um, I think that, like, when I was, yeah, when I visited the Toronto OISE, the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, we got to see some of their schools. They're like discovery learning schools, and seeing some of the teachers and their practices there was incredible. But always in the back of my mind, I was like, but with this scale, like, would you actually be able to do this? Like, what would you need in order to make this, like, to roll this practice out to many different schools? And it boiled down to, does it require like a super teacher, like this teacher who's like really able to deal with chaos and really able to has a really firm grasp of like all aspects of the pedagogy and all of the content that needs to be covered? I don't know. And so that's why I'm always asking, okay, how could I test this out? Right? Could I just take like a teacher who doesn't have any of this background, maybe a newly qualified teacher, like a brand new teacher? Could I see if they could do it? It would be a good question to ask, because the question is not, the experiment is not whether or not the practice works. We know the practice works. But the question is, who does this practice work best with? Where would we deploy this that would be most successful? And so it's just small experiments. And it's one of the reasons why I advocate for doing lots of experiments. So we're really long today. I hope that some of this Q&A was helpful for you. Thank you so much for all of the questions that you've been asking over the last little while. I just, I'm very thankful for that. And of course, like, if you want to get more information, one of the best places is just go to the website. So one last time, edwardc.com. You can go to edwardc.com. You can get your questions answered. You can ask new questions as well. And my plan is, on Sunday, we'll do kind of like a leading up, get out the vote. I'll be there to answer any vote related questions. I know a lot of people are asking now about, where do I go to vote? What is my polling station? How do I know which area I'm supposed to go to? And so we will answer any of those types of questions. It's just making sure that everybody gets out and, just exercising the rights that you have. Your vote matters. Every vote matters. And we would love to see you get out there, make the decisions. And even if it's not for me, like, if you get out the vote, we see that. I learned today, like, I met with Teresa Wupaw, and she told me that at the end of this election, many of the people who are elected, they are going to see who voted and who did not vote. And this information really matters. If they see that all, like, certain groups of people, like ethnic groups of people, don't vote at all, they're going to see that. And when it comes to policies, they're not going to care, right? Because there's nobody who votes in that particular ethnic group. That's really, really bad, right? Like, if you want to be represented in politics, go out and vote. We see those people who vote, and we represent them. And I think that if you don't go out to vote, it is very hard. Like, it's very hard to advocate for you, is what I've learned. And so we will do the best that we can. I want to wish you a blessed evening, and we will speak to you soon. Looking forward to the results of this election. Thank you. Bye-bye.